My name is Sandra Gomez. I'm 29, a Navy SEAL with 6 years of classified missions across 3 continents. I've defused bombs in Kandahar, extracted hostages from cartel compounds in Colombia, and survived a helicopter crash in the mountains of Syria. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for the moment my brother called me worthless at his engagement party, then watched in horror as my entire team surrounded his wedding 3 weeks later. Let me back up. Growing up in Phoenix, Arizona, I was always the tomboy who climbed too high, ran too fast, and asked too many questions. My older brother Derek was the golden child, varsity quarterback, homecoming king, full ride to Arizona State for business. Everyone expected him to be the success story. I was just the scrappy little sister who played with G.I. Joes instead of Barbies. When I enlisted straight out of high school, my family treated it like a phase. She'll do her 4 years and come home, my mother would tell neighbors. Derek was particularly dismissive. He'd gotten his MBA and landed a job at a Fortune 500 consulting firm by the time I was crawling through mud in basic training. At family gatherings, he'd introduce me as my little sister who's playing soldier. The thing is, I wasn't playing anything. While Derek was climbing corporate ladders, I was becoming one of the deadliest weapons the U.S. military has ever produced. SEAL training has a 75% dropout rate. I not only survived it, I excelled. Hand-to-hand combat, advanced weaponry, underwater demolition, psychological operations. I mastered them all. My commanding officers called me a natural. My teammates called me Ghost because I could appear and disappear without a trace. But my family never saw that side of me. They saw the quiet woman who came home for Christmas, said little about her work, and seemed smaller somehow in civilian clothes. What they didn't understand is that we're trained to blend in, to be invisible, to let people underestimate us because that's when we're most dangerous. Derek's engagement party was held at the Phoenician Resort in Scottsdale. Typical Derek. Flashy, expensive, designed to impress. His fiancée, Rachel, came from old money. Her father owned half the real estate developments in Scottsdale. This wasn't just an engagement party. It was Derek's coronation into high society. I wore a simple black dress and sat quietly at the family table, watching my brother work the room like the politician he'd always wanted to be. He was in his element, schmoozing investors, name-dropping clients, making sure everyone knew how successful he'd become. The trouble started when Rachel's father, William Blackstone, asked about family. Derek gestured toward our table with a practiced smile. "That's my sister Sandra," he said, loud enough for half the room to hear. "She's been playing soldier for a few years now. We keep hoping she'll grow out of it and find a real job." The laughter that followed felt like ice in my veins. Not because it hurt. I'd heard worse from enemies who actually wanted to kill me. But because I realized in that moment that my own brother saw me as a joke, a failure, something to be apologized for. But it got worse. As the evening wore on and the alcohol flowed, Derek's tongue got looser. During his toast to Rachel, he decided to share a funny story about how I'd always been the family disappointment, how I'd wasted my potential by choosing military service over college, how he'd tried to get me interviews at real companies, but I was too stubborn to accept help. "Some people are born to lead," he said, raising a champagne glass, "and others are born to follow orders. Sandra's found her place taking commands from people smarter than her." The room laughed again. Even my parents smiled awkwardly, as if agreeing with him was easier than defending me. That's when I knew our relationship would never recover from this moment. Not because of what he said, but because of what he revealed about how little he understood about who I'd become. What Derek didn't know, what none of them knew, was that earlier that day, I'd received an encrypted message on my secure phone. Intelligence had flagged suspicious financial activity connected to Rachel's development company, money laundering, potentially tied to Mexican cartels, the kind of operation that required immediate investigation. What Derek especially didn't know was that 3 of my SEAL teammates were in Phoenix that weekend for a different mission. When I sent them a coded text from the bathroom during his toast, I wasn't just venting about family drama. I was putting pieces together that would change everything. Because while my brother saw a failure sitting quietly at that family table, what was actually sitting there was a highly trained operative who just realized her brother was about to marry into a criminal empire. And unlike Derek, when I make a move, I don't announce it to the room first. 3 weeks later, at St. Mary's Cathedral in downtown Phoenix, Derek would learn the difference between playing successful and actually being dangerous. He'd discovered that the worthless sister he'd mocked had spent years becoming someone he should have been terrified to underestimate. But that moment was still 3 weeks away. That night, I just smiled, congratulated the happy couple, and quietly began planning what would become the most personal mission of my military career. Sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one everyone ignores. You'd think that after surviving Hell Week, where they break you down to your core and rebuild you into a weapon, that dealing with family would be easy. You'd be wrong.
See, there's a strange paradox that comes with being a Navy SEAL. In the field, I'm Sandra Gomez, the woman who can infiltrate a terrorist compound, eliminate multiple targets, and extract intelligence without anyone knowing I was ever there. I've stared down cartel leaders who've killed hundreds of people, and they blinked first. But put me in a room with my family, and suddenly I'm 8 years old again, desperate for approval I'll never get. The night of Derek's engagement party, I sat in my rental car in the Phoenician parking lot for 20 minutes after it ended, just staring at the steering wheel. My hands that have never shaken during a firefight, were trembling slightly, not from fear, but from something worse. The suffocating feeling of being invisible to the people who were supposed to know me best. My phone buzzed. A text from my teammate, Rodriguez, who was stationed at Luke Air Force Base about 30 miles away. How'd the family thing go, Ghost? You good? I stared at that message for a long time. How do you explain to someone who's seen you take out 3 armed guards in under 10 seconds that your brother just made you feel like a complete failure in front of 50 strangers? How do you tell a man who's watched you defuse a bomb while under sniper fire that a champagne toast nearly broke you? The truth is, our training prepares us for enemy fire, not friendly fire from our own blood. I drove back to my hotel, a modest Hampton Inn, not the luxury resort where Derek was staying, and tried to process what had happened. In my room, I caught sight of myself in the mirror, still in that black dress, still looking like someone's quiet little sister. The woman in that reflection bore no resemblance to the operator who'd earned 3 commendations for valor in the past 2 years. That's the thing about being undercover in your own life. You become so good at blending in, at being unremarkable, that sometimes you forget who you really are underneath it all. I changed into workout clothes and hit the hotel gym at midnight. Empty, fluorescent lit, smelling of disinfectant, it felt more like home than that engagement party had. As I worked through my combat conditioning routine, muscle memory kicked in. Each movement precise, controlled, lethal. This was who I was, not Derek's disappointing little sister, but a highly trained operative who dedicated her life to protecting people who would never know her name. But even as I rediscovered my strength in those familiar movements, a darker thought crept in. What if Derek was right? Not about me being worthless, I knew better than that, but about me being in the wrong place. What if I'd become so good at being a ghost that I disappeared from my own family's life entirely? I'd missed Derek's college graduation for a mission in Syria. I'd missed my cousin Maria's wedding for training exercises. I'd missed countless family dinners, holidays, and celebrations because duty always came first. Maybe that's why they saw me as a stranger now. Maybe that's why Derek felt comfortable mocking me in public, because I'd been gone so long, I wasn't really part of the family anymore. The next morning, I was supposed to fly back to Virginia Beach, back to my team, back to the world where I made sense, but something made me change my flight. Instead of leaving Phoenix, I decided to stay for Derek's bachelor party the following weekend. Not because I wanted to celebrate with him after the night before that ship had sailed, but because something he'd said during his toast kept nagging at me. He'd mentioned Rachel's father's business, Blackstone Development, with a kind of reverence that felt off. The way he talked about joining the family business, about the opportunities that would open up once he married Rachel, it sounded less like love and more like a merger. That's when I made the mistake of letting my personal feelings cloud my professional judgment. Instead of reporting the suspicious financial activity I'd been briefed on, I decided to investigate on my own first. Family loyalty, even to a brother who'd humiliated me, ran deeper than I wanted to admit. I told myself I was protecting Derek, that I'd quietly look into Blackstone development, and if there was nothing there, no one would ever have to know. If there was something criminal happening, I'd find a way to get Derek out before it touched him. It was a decision that broke every protocol I'd ever been taught. We're trained never to operate alone, never to let emotions compromise a mission, and never to investigate cases we're personally connected to. But sitting in that hotel room, still stinging from my brother's public dismissal, I convinced myself that this time would be different. I had no idea that by choosing to protect Derek instead of following procedure, I was about to uncover something that would make his wedding day the most dangerous and most humiliating moment of his life, and mine. Because sometimes when you try to save someone who sees you as worthless, you end up having to prove exactly how wrong they are in the most dramatic way possible. The countdown to Derek's wedding had begun, and I'd just made the decision that would change everything. The bachelor party was held at Derek's new penthouse apartment in Old Town Scottsdale. Another gift from Rachel's family, though Derek liked to tell people he'd earned it through hard work. I wasn't invited, obviously. Bachelor parties are for the guys, and despite 6 years of military service, Derek still saw me as his little sister who needed protecting from crude jokes and cigar smoke.
But I didn't need an invitation. When you're trained in surveillance and infiltration, crashing a party without being detected is child's play. I positioned myself in the parking garage across the street with a clear view of Derek's building. High-powered binoculars, directional microphone, and a telephoto camera, standard reconnaissance gear that I'd borrowed from my Phoenix contact at the Naval Intelligence Office. Officially, I was on leave. Unofficially, I was conducting an unauthorized investigation into my brother's future in-laws. The guest list for Derek's bachelor party read like a who's who of Phoenix's young professional elite. Tech entrepreneurs, real estate brokers, investment bankers. The kind of crowd Derek had always wanted to run with. But scattered among the legitimate businessmen were faces I recognized from intelligence briefings. Low-level associates of known criminal organizations. The kind of men who laundered money through legitimate businesses. At 9:47 p.m., William Blackstone himself arrived. Rachel's father rarely attended social gatherings. According to the financial intelligence reports I'd accessed, he preferred to keep his public appearances minimal. His presence at Derek's bachelor party wasn't just unusual, it was suspicious. Through the directional microphone, I caught fragments of conversations that made my blood run cold. Talk of moving packages through construction sites, references to special investors who preferred to stay anonymous, and most damning of all, Derek's voice cutting through the laughter. "Don't worry about the paperwork. Rachel says her dad has people who handle that kind of thing." My brother wasn't just marrying into this family, he was actively participating in whatever they were running. I photographed every license plate in the parking garage, ran facial recognition on every guest I could capture clearly, and documented the timeline of who arrived when and with whom. By midnight, I had enough evidence to justify a full federal investigation into Blackstone development. But I also had confirmation of my worst fear. Derek wasn't an innocent victim about to marry the wrong woman. He was a willing participant. The next few days passed in a blur of conflicted emotions and professional investigation. During the day, I played the role of supportive sister, attending wedding planning sessions and rehearsal dinners, while Derek continued to introduce me as his sister who's still figuring out what to do with her life. Each dismissive comment felt like a knife twist, especially knowing what I discovered about his own life choices. At night, I dug deeper into the Blackstone empire. Financial records showed a pattern of cash-heavy real estate deals that made no economic sense unless you needed to clean dirty money. Construction contracts awarded to companies with no previous building experience but extensive ties to Mexican cartel operations. a web of shell corporations and offshore accounts that existed for one purpose, making illegal money appear legitimate. Derek's name appeared on documents dating back 8 months, long before his engagement to Rachel. This wasn't a recent development or a case of him getting in over his head. He'd been recruited deliberately, probably because his MBA and clean background made him perfect for legitimizing questionable transactions. The morning of the rehearsal dinner, I made a decision that went against every instinct I'd developed as a SEAL. Instead of reporting what I'd found to federal authorities, I decided to confront Derek directly. Family loyalty is a weakness in our line of work, but sometimes it's stronger force than training. I found him in the hotel bar 2 hours before the rehearsal, nursing a whiskey and looking more nervous than I'd ever seen him. For a moment, he almost looked like the big brother who used to let me tag along to his baseball games. "Derek," I said, sliding into the booth across from him, "we need to talk." He glanced up, and I saw something flicker in his eyes. Guilt, maybe, or fear. "If you're here to lecture me about Rachel again, I'm here to tell you that you're in danger. Real danger. The kind that ends with federal prison or worse." His laugh was hollow. "What would you know about danger, Sandra? You've been playing dress-up soldier for 6 years while I've been building a real career." That's when I made my second mistake. Instead of showing him the evidence, instead of explaining exactly what I'd discovered, I let his dismissal trigger my anger. "You want to know what I know about danger?" I said, my voice carrying the edge it gets in combat situations. "I know that William Blackstone's development company is a front for money laundering. I know that the special investors you've been so excited about are cartel operatives. And I know that you've been signing documents that make you an accessory to federal crimes." Derek's face went white, then red. "You've been spying on me?" "I've been trying to protect you," I shot back. "But apparently you don't need protection. You need a lawyer." He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "You're jealous," he said, loud enough that other patrons turned to look. "You're so pathetically jealous of my success that you're making up conspiracy theories to try to ruin my wedding." "Derek, listen to me." "No. You listen," he said, leaning over the table. "Tomorrow is the most important day of my life, and I'm not going to let my bitter, worthless sister sabotage it with whatever paranoid fantasies you've cooked up. Stay away from my wedding, Sandra. I mean it." He threw a 20 on the table and walked away, leaving me sitting alone with the weight of what I'd just learned about my brother. He wasn't a victim in this situation. He wasn't even willingly ignorant. He knew exactly what he was getting into, and he'd chosen money and status over everything else, including his own safety.
That night, I made the call I should have made days earlier. My commanding officer, Captain Mitchell, answered on the second ring. "Sir," I said, "I need to report suspicious activity connected to ongoing cartel operations in the Phoenix area. I have evidence of money laundering through a local development company, and I believe there may be an opportunity for a significant operation tomorrow." "Tomorrow?" he said. "That's short notice for coordination with local authorities." "Yes, sir, but I have reason to believe that several high-value targets will be gathered in one location, a wedding at St. Mary's Cathedral downtown." There was a long pause. "Gomez, please tell me this isn't personal." I looked out the window of my hotel room toward the cathedral where Derek would be married in 18 hours. "It's completely personal, sir, but it's also the right thing to do. We'll have a team there by 00800. You'll brief them on site." As I hung up the phone, I realized that Derek had been right about one thing. Tomorrow would be the most important day of his life, just not in the way he'd imagined. The wedding morning arrived with the kind of brilliant Arizona sunshine that makes everything look deceptively perfect. I'd been awake since 4 a.m., running through final preparations with my team who'd arrived under cover of darkness. Captain Mitchell had pulled strings to get FBI and DEA cooperation on such short notice. The Blackstone investigation had been on federal radar for months, but they'd never had a clean opportunity to catch the entire operation in one place. St. Mary's Cathedral sits in the heart of downtown Phoenix, a Gothic revival structure that's hosted society weddings for over a century. Today, it would host something else entirely,
the largest money laundering bust in Arizona state history. From my position in the surveillance van parked 3 blocks away, I watched through high-definition cameras as guests began arriving for Derek's 2 p.m. ceremony. My earpiece crackled with updates from my teammates positioned around the perimeter. Ghost, we've got eyes on William Blackstone arriving via motorcade. 3 vehicles, heavy security detail. Copy that, I replied, adjusting my tactical vest under the modest gray dress I'd chosen for the occasion. To anyone watching, I looked like just another wedding guest arriving fashionably late. In reality, I was carrying enough firepower to level a small building and wearing a communication system that connected me to a dozen federal agents. Through my scope, I watched my parents hurrying up the cathedral steps, my mother fussing with her hat while my father checked his watch. They looked so proud, so excited to see their golden son marry into Pinex high society. If they only knew that in 2 hours, their son would be led away in handcuffs while cameras rolled. Jesus, Sandra, what are you about to do to this family? But then I caught sight of something that reminded me exactly why I was here. A black Escalade pulled up to the cathedral's side entrance, and 3 men got out. I recognized them immediately from the intelligence photos. Miguel Vasquez, Eduardo Santos, and Carlos Mendez, high-ranking members of the Sinaloa cartel's financial operations. These weren't small-time money launderers. These were the men responsible for moving hundreds of millions in drug proceeds through legitimate American businesses. And they were here to celebrate my brother's wedding. Target confirmation on Vasquez, Santos, and Mendez, I reported into my mic. They're entering through the bride's side entrance. Copy, Ghost. All units, we are officially green for Operation White Veil. The irony of the operation name wasn't lost on me. Rachel would indeed be wearing a white veil today, but it would be the last pure thing about this ceremony. My phone buzzed with a text from Derek. Saw you pull up on the security cameras. Thought I told you to stay away. Don't make a scene. I almost laughed. A scene was exactly what I was about to make, though not the kind Derek was worried about. As guests filed into the cathedral, I recognized faces from my surveillance photos mixed in with legitimate wedding attendees. Derek's college friends sat next to known cartel associates. Rachel's sorority sisters chatted with women whose husbands ran illegal gambling operations. It was like watching 2 worlds collide in the most surreal way possible. At 1:45 p.m., I finally entered the cathedral myself. The interior was breathtaking. Soaring ceilings, stained glass windows casting colored light across marble floors, and enough flowers to stock a small nursery. Rachel had spared no expense, which made sense considering the dirty money funding it all. I took a seat in the back, close to the exit and with clear sight lines to all the primary targets. My parents waved at me from the front row, my mother beaming with joy. Derek stood at the altar in his custom tuxedo, looking every inch the successful businessman he'd always wanted to be. For a moment, he caught my eye and his expression hardened with the same dismissive look he'd given me all my life. All units, ceremony beginning in 15 minutes, I whispered into my concealed microphone. Targets are in position. What Derek didn't know, what none of them knew, was that federal agents had been infiltrating this guest list for the past week. The florist arranging the altar arrangements was DEA. The photographer capturing precious moments was FBI. Even the elderly woman in the second pew who kept dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief was a federal marshal with 30 years of experience.
As the organ music began and everyone rose for Rachel's entrance, I found myself thinking about all the family gatherings where Derek had made me feel small. All the times he'd dismissed my service as playing soldier. All the moments when I'd wished he could see me as something more than his disappointing little sister. Be careful what you wish for. Rachel looked stunning as she walked down the aisle, her dress a masterpiece of silk and lace that probably cost more than most people's cars. William Blackstone escorted her with the pride of a man who'd built an empire. Never mind that the empire was constructed on violence and human suffering. The priest began the ceremony with traditional words about love, honor, and commitment. Words that felt particularly hollow, given what I knew about the groom's true commitments. Derek repeated his vows with conviction, promising to love and cherish Rachel, for better or worse, in good times and bad. He had no idea how bad things were about to get.
Ghost, we're picking up increased chatter on cartel communications, came Rodriguez's voice through my earpiece. Something about a major transaction scheduled for immediately after the ceremony. Of course. The wedding wasn't just the celebration, it was cover for a massive money transfer. While guests threw rice and took photos, millions of dollars in cartel proceeds would be officially laundered through Blackstone Development's latest investment opportunity. All units be advised we're looking at a dual operation, I whispered. Wedding ceremony plus major financial transaction. Recommend we move during the kiss. Copy that, Ghost. Stand by for go signal. As the priest asked if anyone had objections to this union, I almost laughed at the irony. Oh, I had objections. All right. I objected to my brother becoming a criminal. I objected to watching him throw away everything our family had taught us about right and wrong. And I objected to him spending one more second thinking I was the family failure. You may kiss the bride, the priest announced. Derek lifted Rachel's veil, and as their lips met to seal their union, I pressed the transmit button on my radio and spoke the words that would change everything. All units, this is Ghost. Execute Operation White Veil. Repeat, execute Operation White Veil. The kiss lasted 3 seconds. The aftermath would last the rest of Derek's life. The transformation happened in seconds, but it felt like watching a slow-motion avalanche. The moment Derek and Rachel's lips parted from their wedding kiss, the cathedral's massive doors burst open with a sound like thunder. Not the gentle creak of late arrivals, but the explosive bang of tactical teams executing a coordinated breach. Federal agents in full combat gear poured through every entrance. Main doors, side chapels, even the vestry where the choir robes were stored. Federal agents, nobody move, hands where we can see them. The wedding guests' reaction was a symphony of chaos. Elderly relatives screamed and clutched their purses. College friends dove under pews thinking it was a terrorist attack. Children started crying, while their parents frantically tried to shield them from what looked like a military invasion. But 3 tables of guests didn't scream. They didn't dive for cover or look confused. Miguel Vazquez and his associates sat perfectly still, their hands slowly moving away from their jackets, while their eyes scanned for exits that were already being blocked by agents with assault rifles. From my position in the back pew, I had a perfect view of Derek's face as his wedding day disintegrated around him. First came confusion. His mouth actually fell open as he tried to process why armed federal agents were surrounding his altar. Then came the dawning realization as he saw William Blackstone being forced to his knees, hands zip-tied behind his back while an FBI agent read him his rights. William Blackstone, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit money laundering, racketeering, and providing material support to criminal organizations. Rachel's scream cut through the agent's words like a blade. Still in her wedding dress, she lunged towards her father before being gently but firmly restrained by a female agent who'd been posing as a wedding coordinator all week. That's when Derek's eyes found mine across the chaos. For the first time in my life, I saw genuine fear in my brother's face. Not embarrassment, not anger, but pure terror as the implications crashed over him like a wave. Derek Gomez, Agent Martinez called out, producing a warrant from his tactical vest. You need to come with us. Wait! Derek's voice cracked like a teenager's. There's been a mistake! I don't know what's happening here! But even as he protested his innocence, I watched him glance toward the side chapel where I knew the money transfer was supposed to happen after the ceremony. The briefcase containing bearer bonds worth $12 million, funds that would be officially invested in Blackstone Development's latest resort project by Monday morning. Agent Martinez followed Derek's gaze and nodded to his team. Within seconds, they'd located the briefcase hidden behind the altar's flower arrangements. When they opened it, even the experienced federal agents looked impressed by the neat stacks of negotiable securities.
Ladies and gentlemen, Agent Martinez announced to the terrified wedding guests, you're witnessing the conclusion of an 18-month federal investigation into money laundering operations run through Blackstone Development Corporation. Anyone not involved in criminal activity is free to leave through the main doors after providing identification to the officers stationed there.
The legitimate wedding guests, my parents, Derek's college friends, Rachel's sorority sisters, stood on shaky legs and began filing out while casting horrified glances back at the altar where Derek still stood in his tuxedo, hands now secured behind his back. My mother caught my eye as she passed my pew. "Sandra, what's happening? Why are they arresting Derek?" I couldn't bring myself to answer. How do you tell your mother that her golden child has been washing drug money for Mexican cartels? How do you explain that the family's success story she'd bragged about to neighbors was built on blood and cocaine? "I'll explain later, Mom," I said softly. "Just go home. I'll handle this." She looked confused by my calm demeanor in the middle of this chaos, but my father took her arm and guided her toward the exit. They'd have questions I wasn't ready to answer, but at least they were safe. As the cathedral cleared of innocent bystanders, the real scope of the operation became visible. 14 arrests total. William Blackstone and his inner circle, 3 high-ranking cartel operatives, 2 corrupt Phoenix City officials who had been facilitating the development permits, and Derek. Plus seizure of $12 million in bearer bonds, 4 vehicles packed with additional evidence, and enough financial records to keep prosecutors busy for years. Agent Martinez approached my pew, his expression unreadable behind tactical sunglasses. "Ms. Gomez, we're going to need you to come with us for debriefing." I nodded and stood, but Derek's voice stopped me. "Sandra!" He was being led toward the side exit in handcuffs, but he twisted around to look at me. "Sandra, you have to tell them. Tell them I didn't know what they were doing." The desperation in his voice was heartbreaking, but what shattered me was the assumption underneath it. Even now, even facing federal charges, Derek still believed his little sister was too stupid to understand what was really happening. He thought I was an innocent bystander who could vouch for his character. He had no idea I was the one who'd brought this entire operation down on his head. "I'll explain exactly what I know, Derek," I said, meeting his eyes across the devastated cathedral. "Every detail." Something in my tone must have penetrated his panic because his expression shifted from desperate hope to growing confusion. "What do you mean, every detail?" Agent Martinez was already guiding Derek away, but I saw the moment understanding began to dawn. His face went pale as he looked at me, really looked at me, for perhaps the first time in years. Not the disappointing little sister who couldn't find a real job, but someone who spoke in the measured tones of a federal agent discussing an operation. "Rodriguez, get him in the van," Agent Martinez called out. "We'll sort out family dynamics during interrogation." As Derek disappeared through the cathedral doors, still in his wedding tuxedo and handcuffs, I remained standing in the back pews surrounded by scattered rose petals and abandoned wedding programs. The altar that had hosted dozens of society weddings over the decades was now a crime scene, marked off with yellow tape and federal evidence markers. My secure phone buzzed with a message from Captain Mitchell. "Outstanding work, Ghost. Report to Phoenix Field Office at 1800 for full debrief. Well done." I looked around the empty cathedral one last time. Sunlight still streamed through the stained glass windows, casting the same beautiful colors across the marble floors. Nothing had changed about this sacred space, but everything had changed about my family. In 6 years of military service, I'd never fired a shot in anger. My deadliest missions had been silent infiltrations and intelligence gathering. But standing in that cathedral, I realized I'd just delivered the most devastating blow of my career, not to an enemy combatant, but to my own brother. The man who'd called me worthless would spend the next 10 to 15 years in federal prison, courtesy of the useless soldier he'd underestimated his entire life. Sometimes justice feels like victory. Sometimes it just feels like loss. The Phoenix FBI field office buzzes with the kind of controlled energy that follows a major bust. Agents moved between cubicles carrying evidence boxes, phones rang constantly with calls from Washington, and somewhere in the building's interrogation rooms, my brother was learning that his new life would be measured in years behind bars rather than profit margins. I sat in conference room C, still wearing the gray dress I'd chosen for his wedding, watching Agent Martinez lay out photographs across the conference table like a dealer spreading cards. Each image told part of the story. Derek entering Blackstone development offices, Derek signing documents at various construction sites, Derek shaking hands with men whose faces belonged on federal most wanted lists. Your brother's been busy, Martinez said, settling into the chair across from me. These photos span 8 months. This wasn't some recent involvement. He was recruited specifically for this operation. The photos hurt more than I had expected. Not because I was shocked by Derek's guilt, but because I could see the progression of his corruption laid out in chronological order. In the earliest images, he looked nervous, uncertain. By the most recent ones, taken just 2 weeks ago, he carried himself with the confidence of someone fully committed to the criminal enterprise. When did you first suspect his involvement? Martinez asked, activating a digital recorder.
I'd been dreading this question for hours. How do you explain that you've been conducting an unauthorized investigation into your own family? That you'd violated protocol by not reporting suspicious activity immediately? That you'd let personal emotions compromise your professional judgment? 3 weeks ago, at his engagement party, I began carefully, Derek mentioned joining William Blackstone's business with a level of enthusiasm that seemed disproportionate to a normal job opportunity. Combined with the intelligence briefings I'd received about suspicious financial activity connected to Blackstone development, I felt the situation warranted closer observation. Martinez raised an eyebrow. Closer observation. Is that what we're calling it? He slid another photograph across the table. This one showed me in the parking garage across from Derek's apartment building, clearly conducting surveillance with professional equipment. My stomach dropped. Agent Martinez, I can explain. No need to explain, Gomez. Your unauthorized investigation provided crucial intelligence that made today's operation possible. But let's be clear about what happened here. You conducted a solo surveillance operation on American citizens without proper authorization, you failed to report suspected criminal activity through appropriate channels, and you allowed personal relationships to influence your tactical decisions. Each accusation hit like a physical blow because they were all true. I'd violated everything I'd been taught about proper procedure, about chain of command, about the separation between personal and professional obligations. However, Martinez continued, your intelligence gathering was exemplary, your tactical assessment was accurate, and your final decision to report the situation ultimately served justice. Captain Mitchell has recommended you for commendation rather than disciplinary action. Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by guilt. I was being praised for destroying my own family. There's something else, Martinez said, his tone shifting. Your brother is asking to see you. My heart stopped. What? He's been in interrogation for 3 hours. Denied lawyer, denied plea negotiations, denied everything. But he keeps asking to speak with his sister. Says you can clear up this whole misunderstanding. The irony was devastating. Derek still believed I was innocent, still thought his little sister was too naive to understand what was really happening. Even faced with overwhelming evidence of his own guilt, he was trying to drag me into his lies. I don't think that's a good idea, I said. Actually, it might be exactly what we need, Martinez replied. He's not talking to us, but he might talk to you, and if he does, you want me to wear a wire. I want you to give your brother one last chance to tell the truth before we proceed with federal charges that will put him away for 15 years minimum. The request sat between us like a loaded weapon. Derek had spent years dismissing me, belittling me, treating me like I was too stupid to matter. Now they wanted me to use that perception against him, to let him underestimate me one final time while recording every incriminating word. He's my brother, I said quietly. He's also a criminal who's been washing money for cartels that kill thousands of people every year. The choice is yours, but consider this. Cooperation now might reduce his sentence from 15 years to 7. Continued denial will cost him everything. I stared at the photographs spread across the table. Derek at construction sites where drug money was being cleaned. Derek signing contracts that legitimized cartel operations. Derek shaking hands with men who specialized in violence and murder. If I do this and he confesses, what happens to my family? Your parents? Martinez shrugged. Nothing. They're clearly innocent. This ends with Derek and the Blackstones. No, I mean, what happens to my relationship with my family when they find out I was the one who brought this whole thing down?
Martinez leaned back in his chair, studying my face. That's not really a federal law enforcement question, is it? He was right. This wasn't about tactics or evidence or legal strategy. This was about whether I was willing to betray my brother's trust one final time to save him from himself. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. Sandra, where are you? Derek needs a lawyer. Your father is trying to find money for bail. Please come help us figure this out. The message crystallized everything. My parents were mobilizing to save Derek, assuming he was innocent, preparing to sacrifice their retirement savings to bail out their son. They had no idea what he'd become, what he'd been doing, how far he'd fallen. If I walked away now, Derek would continue denying everything. The federal prosecutors would throw the book at him, he'd get the maximum sentence, and my parents would spend the rest of their lives believing their son was wrongfully convicted. They'd mortgage their house, drain their savings, and destroy themselves trying to support a lie. But if I wore that wire, if I gave Derek one last chance to confess, maybe I could save him from the worst of it. Maybe I could spare my parents the financial and emotional devastation of a protracted legal battle they couldn't win. Okay, I said finally. I'll do it. Martinez nodded and reached for his radio. Tech team to conference room C. We need a full wire setup for family interview. As technicians filed into the room with recording equipment, I realized I was about to have the most important conversation of Derek's life, and he would have no idea that every word would determine whether he spent the next 7 years in prison or the next 15. The little sister he dismissed as worthless was about to become the most important person in his world. He just wouldn't know it until it was too late. The recording device was smaller than I'd expected, barely the size of a coin, taped against my ribs where it would pick up both my voice and Derek's through bone conduction. The technician adjusted the wireless transmitter one final time, his fingers cold and professional as he secured the equipment under my dress. Remember, Agent Martinez said, as we walked toward the interrogation wing, let him talk. Don't lead him toward confessions. Don't prompt him with details he hasn't offered himself. If this goes to trial, defense attorneys will tear apart anything that sounds coached. I nodded, though my mouth felt like cotton. Through the reinforced glass window of interview room 3, I could see Derek slumped in a metal chair, his wedding tuxedo wrinkled and his bow tie hanging loose around his neck. He looked smaller somehow, diminished without his usual confident posture. 15 minutes maximum, Martinez said, his hand on the door handle. If he asks about lawyers or wants to stop talking, you end the conversation immediately. Understood? Understood. The door opened with a soft click, and Derek's head snapped up. For a moment, his face lit up with the same relief I used to see when I'd rescue him from neighborhood bullies when we were kids. Sandra, thank God you're here. He started to stand, then remembered the handcuffs securing him to the table. This whole thing is insane. They're saying I'm some kind of criminal mastermind, but you know me. You know I could never... Derek? I sat down across from him, my voice steadier than I felt. Tell me what happened today. What happened? His laugh had a hysterical edge. What happened is the FBI decided to turn my wedding into some kind of action movie. They arrested Rachel's father. They're saying he's connected to Mexican cartels, and somehow they think I'm involved just because I work for his company. The lie came so easily, so naturally, that I almost believed he'd convinced himself it was true. This was the Derek I remembered from childhood, the one who could look our parents in the eye and swear he hadn't broken the neighbor's window, even while holding the baseball that did it. How long have you been working for William Blackstone? Maybe 8 months, maybe 9. Sandra, you have to understand, this is the biggest opportunity I've ever had. Real estate development, major construction projects, the kind of deals that can set up our whole family for life. What kind of deals? Derek leaned forward eagerly, finally seeing a chance to explain himself to someone who might listen. Resort developments, commercial properties, luxury housing complexes. Blackstone has investors lined up for projects worth hundreds of millions of dollars. I've been handling the financial documentation, making sure everything meets federal compliance standards. The irony was staggering. Derek genuinely believed he had been ensuring federal compliance while helping to launder cartel money. Either he was a better liar than I'd given him credit for, or his capacity for self-deception ran deeper than the Mariana Trench. Where do the investors come from? I asked carefully. All over. Mexico, Central America, some European interests. Blackstone has connections everywhere. Derek's expression shifted slightly, the first crack in his confident facade. I mean, I don't handle the investor relations directly. That's more Rachel's father's area. But you've met them, the investors. Some of them, sure. At business dinners, construction site visits, that kind of thing. They're intense businessmen, very focused on returns, very interested in privacy. Intense businessmen. That's one way to describe cartel money managers who'd killed more people than most serial killers. Derek, I said, leaning forward to match his posture, have you ever wondered why these investors are so interested in privacy? Why they prefer cash transactions? Why they're willing to invest in projects that won't see returns for years? For a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Doubt, maybe, or suppressed knowledge fighting its way to the surface. Then his defensive walls slammed back up. You sound like the FBI agents, he said accusingly. Everyone's acting like normal business practices are somehow criminal. So what if investors prefer discretion? So what if they like to keep their financial affairs private? That's their right. Even when those investors are Miguel Vasquez, Eduardo Santos, and Carlos Mendez? His face went pale. How do you know those names? The question hung in the air between us like a loaded gun. This was the moment when I either backed away or pushed him toward the truth that might save his life. Derek, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Those three men are not investors. They're money managers for the Sinaloa cartel. They're responsible for laundering hundreds of millions in drug proceeds through legitimate American businesses, and you've been helping them do it. That's impossible. But his voice had lost his conviction. Sandra, these are businessmen. They wear suits, they speak perfect English, they know more about real estate law than I do. They also know more about murder, torture, and human trafficking than you ever want to learn, I said softly. Derek, the FBI has been investigating Blackstone development for 18 months. They have photographs, financial records, recorded conversations. This isn't a misunderstanding or a case of mistaken identity. This is a federal organized crime investigation, and you're in the middle of it. Derek stared at me for a long moment, and I could see his mind racing through memories, recontextualizing conversations and transactions that seemed normal at the time. But I never... He stopped. I just handled the paperwork. I made sure the contracts were legally sound, the permits were in order, the financial documentation met banking requirements.
Which made you the perfect frontman for legitimizing dirty money, I said. Your MBA, your clean background, your attention to detail, that's exactly what they needed to make their operation look legitimate. The silence stretched between us as Derek processed the implications. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Sandra, if what you're saying is true, if I've really been involved in something like this, what happens to me now? This was it, the moment when I could guide him toward confession and cooperation, potentially saving him years in prison. Or the moment when he would dig in deeper, deny everything, and face the full weight of federal prosecution. That depends, I said carefully, on what you do next. Derek looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before, not dismissive, not condescending, but genuinely seeking guidance from the sister he'd spent years underestimating. What do you think I should do? For the first time in my life, Derek was asking for my advice, and I was about to give him counsel that would determine whether he spent the next 7 years in prison or the next 15. Derek's question hung in the air like smoke from a gunshot. For 30 years, he'd never once asked for my advice on anything more serious than which tie to wear to a job interview. Now, handcuffed to a metal table in a federal building, he was finally ready to hear what his worthless sister had to say. "Tell me about the briefcase," I said quietly. His face crumpled. "What briefcase?"
The one behind the altar, Derek. The one with $12 million in bearer bonds that was supposed to be transferred after your wedding ceremony. The color drained from his face so completely I thought he might faint. How could you possibly know about that? Because I've been watching you for 3 weeks, I said, the truth finally spilling out between us. I've photographed your meetings, recorded your conversations, and documented every transaction you've been part of since your engagement party. Derek stared at me like I'd suddenly started speaking a foreign language. You've been... what? Surveillance, Derek. The kind of professional surveillance that gathers evidence for federal investigations. The kind that people like me do when we're not playing soldier. The realization hit him in waves. First confusion, then disbelief, then something approaching terror as the implications sank in. You're... He struggled with the words. You're working with them, with the FBI. I am the FBI. Well, Navy intelligence working with the FBI. The useless soldier you've been mocking for years is actually a highly trained federal operative who specializes in exactly this kind of investigation. Derek's mouth opened and closed without sound. I watched him mentally replay every conversation we'd had over the past month, every dismissive comment he'd made about my career, every assumption he'd made about my capabilities. The engagement party, he whispered. When you asked about Blackstone's business, you weren't making small talk. I was conducting preliminary intelligence gathering on a suspected money laundering operation. The bachelor party, you weren't invited, but you... His eyes widened. You were there anyway, watching. From a surveillance position across the street with directional microphones and telephoto cameras. Yes. Derek slumped back in his chair, the full weight of his situation finally settling on his shoulders. Jesus Christ, Sandra, how long have you known? Known what, specifically? That I was... He couldn't bring himself to say the words. Laundering money for Mexican cartels? I suspected it 3 weeks ago. I confirmed it 2 weeks ago. I've had enough evidence to arrest you for 10 days. Then why didn't you? The question came out as barely a whisper. This was the moment I'd been dreading since I put on the wire. How do you explain to someone that you spent weeks trying to find a way to save them from themselves? How do you tell your brother that you'd risk your own career hoping against hope that he wasn't as guilty as the evidence suggested? I kept hoping I was wrong. I kept looking for evidence that you were innocent, that you'd been manipulated or coerced or somehow didn't understand what you were involved in. And did you find any evidence that I was innocent? I met his eyes across the metal table. No, Derek, I found the opposite. I found evidence that you knew exactly what you were doing, that you'd been recruited specifically for this operation, and that you'd been actively participating for 8 months. The silence that followed was deafening. Derek stared at his handcuffed wrists, his wedding ring catching the fluorescent light. Outside the interview room, I could hear the muffled sounds of the FBI field office. Phones ringing, printers humming, agents discussing cases that would send people to prison for decades. The briefcase, Derek said finally. You asked about the briefcase. $12 million in bearer bonds, hidden behind the altar arrangements. Payment for legitimizing cartel funds through the new resort development in Sedona. Derek's laugh was hollow and broken. You know more about my business than I do. I know more about your crimes than you do, I corrected, because you've been so busy convincing yourself this was legitimate business that you stopped seeing what it really was. And what is it really?
Treason, Derek. You've been providing material support to criminal organizations that are actively at war with the United States government. People die because of the drugs these cartels bring across our borders. Families are destroyed. Communities are devastated, and you've been helping them profit from it. Derek was quiet for a long time, processing the weight of what I'd told him. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, smaller, less certain than I'd ever heard it. What happens now? That depends on what you tell Agent Martinez when I leave this room. You mean it depends on whether I confess? I mean it depends on whether you cooperate. there's a difference. Derek looked up at me with eyes that suddenly seemed much older than his 33 years. If I cooperate, if I tell them everything, what's my sentence? 7 to 10 years, probably. With good behavior, you could be out in 5. And if I don't, 15 to 20. Minimum. The mathematics of his situation were brutal, but simple. Cooperation meant admitting everything, destroying any remaining shreds of his reputation, and spending the prime years of his life behind bars. Denial meant spending even more time in prison while destroying our parents financially and emotionally in the process. Sandra, I need you to know something. What? You were right about everything. I did know what I was doing. Maybe not at first, but somewhere along the way, I figured it out. And I kept doing it anyway because the money was... He shook his head. Because I liked feeling important. I liked being the guy who could make million-dollar deals happen. I liked Rachel's father treating me like a son instead of some kid from Phoenix who got lucky. It was the first completely honest thing Derek had said to me in years. I'm sorry for calling you worthless, for dismissing your service, for treating you like you didn't matter. You're the only one in this family who actually became something meaningful, and I was too jealous to see it. I felt tears threatening for the first time since this whole thing started. Derek. No, let me finish. I destroyed my life because I was so desperate to prove I was successful that I stopped caring how I did it. And you dedicated your life to protecting people, to serving something bigger than yourself. I should have been proud of you instead of threatened by you. He looked down at his handcuffs again. I'm going to cooperate. I'm going to tell them everything. Not because of the sentence reduction, but because you're right. People die because of what I helped facilitate, and that has to stop. I reached across the table and covered his handcuffed hands with mine. I'm proud of you for saying that. I just wish it hadn't taken getting arrested at my own wedding to figure out who the real success story in this family was. Outside the interview room, Agent Martinez was waiting with a legal cooperation agreement that would change the trajectory of Derek's life. But in that moment, handcuffed to a table in a federal building, my brother had finally become the man I'd always hoped he could be. It just came about 20 years too late. The cooperation agreement was 47 pages of legal language that boiled down to a simple proposition. Derek would tell federal prosecutors everything he knew about Blackstone Development's money laundering operation in exchange for reduced sentence and protection from cartel retaliation. I watched him sign each page with the same careful precision he'd once used to legitimize dirty money, except now he was using that attention to detail to undo the damage he helped create. Agent Martinez had been right about one thing. Derek knew far more than even I had suspected. Over the next 6 hours, sitting in that sterile conference room with prosecutors from 3 different federal agencies, my brother systematically dismantled an operation that had been moving cartel money through Arizona's construction industry for over 2 years. The Sedona resort was just the beginning, Derek explained, to Assistant U.S. Attorney Patricia Hendricks, a sharp-eyed woman who'd built her career prosecuting organized crime cases. Blackstone had plans for developments in Flagstaff, Tucson, even Las Vegas. Each project was designed to absorb between 50 and 100 million in cartel proceeds. I sat in the corner of the room, officially present as Derek's federal handler, but really there because he'd requested my presence as his next of kin. Every revelation hit like a physical blow. The scope of what Derek had been involved in went far beyond what our surveillance had uncovered. Tell us about the Phoenix City officials, Hendricks said, consulting her notes. Derek's jaw tightened. Councilman Rodriguez and Planning Commissioner Walsh. They fast-tracked permits for any project Blackstone submitted. No environmental reviews, no community impact studies, no questions about financing sources. How much were they paid? Rodriguez got $50,000 cash for each approved permit. Walsh was more expensive, $100,000 plus a new BMW every year. The casual way Derek recited these numbers showed how normalized corruption had become in his world. In the span of 8 months, he'd gone from being an honest businessman to someone who discussed six-figure bribes like routine operating expenses. What about the construction companies? Hendricks continued. Shell corporations, all of them. Blackstone would create a new company for each project, staff it with cartel associates who had clean backgrounds, then dissolve it once the money was laundered. The companies never actually built anything. They just existed on paper to justify massive cash payments. As the debrief continued, I found myself thinking about our parents. They were probably sitting in their living room right now, frantically making phone calls to bail bondsmen and criminal defense attorneys, spending money they couldn't afford to save a son who'd been living alive for the better part of a year.
My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. Sandra, the bail hearing is tomorrow at 9 a.m. Can you be there? Derek needs his family. I stared at the message, then glanced at Derek as he detailed how cartel money had been used to purchase luxury vehicles that were then donated to various charities as tax write-offs. Tomorrow morning, when our parents walked into that courtroom expecting to bail out their son, they'd instead learn that he was cooperating with federal prosecutors in the largest money laundering case in Arizona history. Ms. Gomez, Hendricks said, drawing my attention back to the debriefing, your brother has provided extremely valuable intelligence. However, we need to discuss the security implications of his cooperation. My stomach dropped. Security implications? The cartel members your brother can identify are facing life sentences if convicted. Miguel Vasquez alone is responsible for over 200 murders across Mexico and the southwestern United States. These aren't people who accept betrayal gracefully. Derek had gone pale. Are you saying they'll try to kill me? I'm saying they'll try to kill anyone who threatens their operation, Hendricks replied bluntly. That includes you and potentially your family members. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Derek's cooperation wasn't just about reducing his prison sentence. It was about protecting all of us from people who viewed murder as a routine business expense. What kind of protection are we talking about? I asked. Witness protection for Derek, obviously. New identity, relocation, complete severing of ties with his previous life. For immediate family members? Hendricks paused, consulting another file. We'd recommend enhanced security measures, potentially temporary relocation until the trials are concluded. Derek looked at me with horror. Sandra, I'm so sorry. I never meant for this to put you in danger. The danger was always there. From the moment you signed your first document for Blackstone, you put our entire family at risk. At least now we can address it. Agent Martinez leaned forward. There's something else we need to discuss. Derek's wedding ceremony today was attended by over 200 people, including several legitimate business contacts and family friends. Word of his arrest is already spreading through Phoenix's professional community. Meaning what? Derek asked. Meaning the cartels will know about your cooperation within hours, not days. We need to move quickly. The next hour was a blur of logistics and security protocols. Derek would be transferred to a federal holding facility outside Phoenix immediately after the debriefing concluded. Our parents would be contacted by U.S. Marshals and given the option of temporary relocation. I would return to active duty with my SEAL team, which ironically made me one of the safest members of the family. As the meeting wound down, Derek pulled me aside near the conference room door. I keep thinking about what you said earlier, he said quietly, about people dying because of the drugs these cartels bring across the border. Derek? No, let me finish. For 8 months, I convinced myself I was just moving money around, just handling paperwork. But you're right. Every dollar I legitimized helped fund operations that destroy lives. How many overdoses happened because I made their money clean? How many families were torn apart by drugs I helped pay for? I didn't have an answer for that question, and Derek didn't seem to expect one. I need you to know, he continued, that testifying against these people isn't just about reducing my sentence. It's about stopping them from doing to other families what they did to ours. What do you mean? Derek's smile was sad and resigned. They didn't just recruit me, Sandra. They studied our family.
They knew exactly which buttons to push. My ego, my jealousy of your success, my desperation to prove I was somebody important. They turned my insecurities into weapons against my own family. The revelation hit like a gut punch. Derek's involvement hadn't been random or opportunistic. The cartels had specifically targeted him because they'd identified our family dynamics as a weakness they could exploit. "That's why this has to end with me," Derek said. "Whatever happens in the trials, whatever sentence I get, at least they won't be able to use the Gomez family against anyone else ever again." Outside the conference room windows, the Phoenix skyline was turning golden in the sunset light. Tomorrow, Derek would begin a new life in witness protection. Our parents would learn the truth about their golden child, and I would return to my SEAL team knowing that the most dangerous mission of my career had been protecting my family from one of its own members. But tonight, for the first time in years, Derek and I were on the same side of a fight that actually mattered. The federal courthouse in downtown Phoenix buzzed with nervous energy as Derek's sentencing hearing convened 6 months later. I sat in the gallery wearing my dress uniform, the same one I'd worn to our grandfather's funeral years earlier, watching my brother stand before Judge Elizabeth Thornton in an orange jumpsuit that had become his daily uniform since entering witness protection. The intervening months had transformed all of us in ways I could never have anticipated. Derek had testified in 4 separate federal trials, his cooperation leading to convictions that dismantled cartel operations across 3 states. Miguel Vasquez, Eduardo Santos, and Carlos Mendez were each sentenced to life without parole. William Blackstone received 45 years. 2 city officials were facing their own trials in the coming months.
But the personal cost had been devastating. Our parents had aged a decade in 6 months. My mother's hair had gone completely gray, and my father had developed a tremor in his hands that appeared whenever Derek's name came up in conversation. They'd attended every day of Derek's testimony, watching their son detail his involvement in crimes they couldn't have imagined in their worst nightmares. Rachel had filed for divorce the day after Derek's arrest, though technically they'd never been legally married since the ceremony was interrupted before the marriage certificate could be signed. She'd also filed a civil suit claiming Derek had defrauded her about his criminal activities, seeking damages for emotional distress and reputational harm. The last I'd heard, she was engaged to a tech entrepreneur in San Francisco, eager to leave Arizona and its memories behind. Your Honor, Assistant U.S. Attorney Hendricks began, Mr. Gomez's cooperation has been extraordinary. His testimony directly led to the conviction of 15 individuals and the seizure of over $300 million in cartel assets. Without his detailed knowledge of the Blackstone operation, many of these criminals would still be operating with impunity. Derek's defense attorney, a court-appointed public defender named James Morrison, nodded respectfully. Additionally, Your Honor, Mr. Gomez has expressed genuine remorse for his actions and has voluntarily entered counseling to address the psychological factors that led to his involvement in these crimes. Judge Thornton, a stern woman in her 60s who'd presided over organized crime cases for over 20 years, studied the sentencing guidelines in front of her. Mr. Gomez, before I announce your sentence, do you have anything you'd like to say to the court? Derek stood slowly, his handcuffs clinking softly in the quiet courtroom. When he spoke, his voice was steady, but heavy with the weight of everything that had led to this moment. Your Honor, 6 months ago, I believed I was a successful businessman about to marry into a prominent family. I was wrong about everything, about my success, about my family, and most importantly, about myself. He paused, glancing back at our parents in the gallery. My mother was crying silently, my father staring straight ahead with the stoic expression he'd adopted whenever emotion threatened to overwhelm him. I want to be clear that no one forced me to participate in money laundering operations. I wasn't threatened or coerced. I made a conscious choice to prioritize money and status over morality and legality. I convinced myself that I was just handling paperwork, but I knew the money was dirty. I knew the people I was working with were dangerous, and I chose to continue anyway. The courtroom was completely silent, except for the soft whir of the ventilation system. But I also want to acknowledge something else, Derek continued.
My sister, Petty Officer Sandra Gomez, put her own career and safety at risk to expose the operation I was part of. For years, I dismissed her military service as inferior to my business career. I called her worthless and treated her like she was a failure. She could have let me face the consequences of my actions alone, but instead, she gave me the opportunity to cooperate and potentially save lives by stopping cartel operations. Derek turned slightly to look at me directly. Sandra, I know you'll probably never forgive me for the danger I put our family in, for the shame I brought on our name, or for the years I wasted treating you like you didn't matter. But I need you to know that your courage in doing the right thing, even when it meant destroying your own brother, showed me what real honor looks like. The tears I'd been holding back for months finally broke free. In all the years of Derek's dismissive comments and condescending attitudes, I'd never once heard him acknowledge my service with genuine respect. Your Honor, Derek continued, turning back to the judge, I understand that my cooperation doesn't erase the harm I caused. Every dollar I helped launder contributed to violence and suffering that I can never undo. I accept full responsibility for my crimes, and I'm prepared to face whatever sentence you deem appropriate. Judge Thornton nodded thoughtfully. Mr. Gomez, your cooperation has indeed been valuable to law enforcement efforts against organized crime. However, the court must also consider the severity of your offenses and the need for deterrence in cases involving cartel money laundering. She opened the sentencing file and read from her prepared statement. Taking into account your cooperation agreement, your genuine expressions of remorse, and the extraordinary assistance you have provided to federal prosecutors, this court sentences you to 7 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. A collective exhale went through the courtroom. 7 years was at the bottom of Derek's sentencing range. Hendricks had delivered on her promise of significant reduction in exchange for cooperation. Additionally, Judge Thornton continued, given the ongoing security concerns related to your testimony against cartel operations, your incarceration will be served in federal protective custody, and your eventual release will be coordinated with the U.S. Marshal Service's Witness Protection Program. Derek nodded, understanding that his cooperation meant he'd never be able to return to his old life even after serving his sentence. The Derek Gomez who'd worked for Blackstone Development, who'd been engaged to Rachel Blackstone, who'd lived in Phoenix and called himself a successful businessman, that person was effectively dead. After the hearing concluded, I was allowed a brief visit with Derek before his transfer to the federal facility where he'd serve his sentence. We sat across from each other in a small attorney conference room, separated by reinforced glass, but connected by a phone system that felt surreal after everything we'd been through.
7 years, Derek said, attempting a smile. Could have been worse. Could have been a lot worse, I agreed. Hendricks said you'll be eligible for early release in 5 years with good behavior. And then what? New identity, new city, new life where no one knows Derek Gomez ever existed? I didn't have an answer for that. The Witness Protection Program meant Derek would essentially become a different person. New name, new background, new everything. The brother I'd grown up with would disappear as completely as if he'd died. Sandra, Derek said quietly, I need you to take care of Mom and Dad. This whole thing has been hardest on them. They'll be okay, I said, though I wasn't entirely sure that was true. They're stronger than you think. And you? Will you be okay? I considered the question seriously. In 6 months, I'd gone from being the family disappointment to being the person who'd saved us all from something much worse. My parents now looked at me with a mixture of pride and bewilderment, finally understanding that their daughter's military career was something extraordinary, rather than something to be apologized for. I will, I said finally. For the first time in my life, I think I actually will. Derek smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him since his arrest. Good. You deserve to be happy, Sandra. You always did. The guards signaled that our time was up. As Derek was led away in handcuffs, I realized this might be the last time I ever saw my brother. The person he'd become in witness protection would be a stranger, and the Derek I'd grown up with was about to disappear forever. But for the first time in our relationship, he was disappearing with respect instead of resentment between us. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.